Welcome everybody to the Love You Wealth podcast. I am Cesar Marin, and what an incredible show we have for you today. I'm joined by my co-host, Gary Seelhorst. Gary, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited about this. The guests that we have today are very influential and very, very important to what it is that we're trying to do on this podcast. Especially with a lot, I'm an executive wellness coach, and I try to really preach mindfulness and a lot of the same techniques. I think that really are paralleled with the things that Dr. Fadiman and Jordan have talked about in this book. And I'm really excited to dive into that a little bit deeper, so that I can actually probably use these as tools that I can employ with a lot of the clients that I have.
Wonderful. Well, without any ado, please welcome Dr. James Fadiman and Jordan Gruber. Dr. James Fadiman, I mean, little introduction needed. The godfather, the architect of the modern day microdosing concept practice. Jordan Gruber, one of the most incredible wordsmiths out there. What a way to really dig deep into words and show and showcase Dr. Fadiman's book. So both of you, thank you for joining us. James, what a pleasure having you. Jordan, what a pleasure having you. Let's start right off the bat. This brand new book that talks about so much about microdosing. A lot of people are calling it the new encyclopedia of microdosing, the new how-to microdosing. I was fortunate enough to get an advanced copy and dive right into it and just learn so much from it. James, the question really begs, why now? Like, why the necessity for this book now?
Well, the necessity for this book is that what we've found is an enormous rush of interest. Last year, Google search, the word microdosing went from a couple 100,000 to 3 million. According to the RAND Corporation, who I assume are accurate as they get most of their money from the Defense Department, said 8 million people used psilocybin last year in the U.S. 4 million of that was microdosing. Wow. So there's a lot of users, There's a lot of interest, and there's not a lot of good information, and there's very little information about the very many conditions that microdoses help. So all of that kind of pressured us to get this book out as fast and as full as possible.
Yeah, excellent. And just to give you a little bit of background from where I've come from too, I was actually in the pharmaceutical industry, and I know there's a big problem I think that a lot of folks have in and around sort of having a pill be sort of like the ultimate fix of something, where you have one indication, one pill, it's reimbursed by insurance, and the whole perception of microdosing, I think it's not just microdosing itself, but as you've illuminated, there's a whole process to this, and and Cesar is a coach as well with this. So there's so many different elements that it's not just kind of like a sort of a one size fits all thing. There's a lot of different sort of certain things that people have bringing into whatever kind of experience that they're going to have with someone like Cesar. But having a book like this really helps to help people look at this as sort of like a holistic approach to performance, well-being, and the like. Is that right?
What we're looking at is, and it was a question from a number of scientists, is how could one substance be so effective across so many conditions? Now, that's the pharmaceutical model.
Yeah.
Pharmaceuticals are as tightly focused on a symptom as possible. And as long as you think that way, microdosing seems a little odd. But if you look at what are the things that help people in general improve their lives across systems, across conditions, and so forth, and you say, well, what's good for everything? And everyone says realistically, nothing's good for everything. And you say, well, how about exercise? Well, that's good for everything. How about sleep? Well, that's good for everything.
Yep.
How about improving your diet? Well, that's good for everything. How about relationships? Well, that's good for everything. What if microdosing seems to fit better into that group because it has very low effects, very little buzz, it's good across systems, and what you begin to see is it's more like a vitamin, which is it improves the whole functioning system, which is mental and physical.
And yet at the same time, we also now have enough science and can put together enough of a picture to support this concept. So we know about the neuroplasticity, we know about the anti-inflammatory effects, we know about how it returns people to homeostasis and equilibrium. So we can begin better and better understand how it is able to do so many things for so many people.
And that's something I wanted to ask, because the book really breaks down incredibly well, like different things that microdosing can help for, right? From, talk about shingles, talk about performance, talk about betterment. And Jordan, I wanted to ask you, what did you find like that you really came across that you're like, wait a minute, that's like, holy cow, I didn't realize that, or I didn't have that notion that microdosing can help for that, because it literally, the book breaks down so many things that it can help for.
Well, I think that I shared Jim's early astonishment that there were physical level items like shingles and like pain that it's working for, even if we don't know exactly why. So I think at this point, it's just seeing the areas that it's coming in. We got a new story. I think I described this on Clubhouse about a guy who's had 40 major operations and has been in terrible pain his whole life. And he figured out on his own, and we don't talk about this in the book, how a microdose of psilocybin and of LSD every day, and his pain is gone after 40 years. And the most unbelievable, picture of an X-ray of his back. And where did that come from? So what's so exciting is just to, hear these reports from different people about women's issues, about health, and also about the performance. It's really amazing.
Yeah. And with performance specifically, and this is something, it's not just for mental health, like you're talking about. I mean, there's so many different things that it really spans a lot of these different components with creativity, with focus, with longevity in general. And that's where I first started getting interested in it. And then when I had met Cesar and I was talking about how it's employed with a lot of the folks that he coaches, that's what really fascinated me, because I always, I've grown up in this Western medicine world where I just think, one indication, one pill. And he was talking about all the different applications for it. And I think that's the biggest thing that I think people that are kind of like curious about it, but don't necessarily know a whole lot, know that sort of like the wide swath that this covers. And that's, I think, a lot of the stuff that I think people that are new to this would be really interested. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we heard, for example, from Ben Greenfield a few weeks ago that people who are ultramarathon runners, the word is out, and they're having better times and, more resilience and less pain. And so, I mean, we do some predictions in the book, which of course is a fool's game. But one of the predictions that I've made is that I think that people who are into every type of art and creative effort, from writing and poetry to music to all of the sports and all of the physical endeavors, I think you will see people at the cutting edge of every single one of these experimenting and benefiting from microdosing in not very long.
Yeah, I think we heard about Mike Tyson as he was training for his last fight. He's almost 60, and he was microdosing as well. He said he felt a lot more energy. He felt a lot more performance. He felt, it's very reactive, and he felt like his spidey senses were tingling the whole time he was going through. And this is without any psychoactivity. And I think that's what people need to understand is, this is you're at a point where it's sort of sub-perceptive. It's
one of the definitions of microdosing is has none of the extraordinary, fascinating, wild, irritating, terrific, crazy effects of higher doses. Period.
Right.
In fact, if you are microdosing and you feel a little bit what's called coming on, a little bit as if your system is beginning to get interested in itself and not what you're doing, that's by definition an overdose.
Mm-hmm.
What we're looking at
And
one of the researchers, Connor at UCLA, has basically said, if you think about it really, and you look at the thousands of years where microdosing has been used indigenously, it looks like that's the correct dose that doesn't affect your day and get you into nutty spaces, but that improves your health. And that all of the high dose work, which I should acknowledge, maybe 40 or 50 years working on, may be simply what we would call high doses.
Or an overdose.
Basically, a kind of overdose of the basic capacity. And a lot of medications, and you've been in pharmaceuticals, a lot of medications when they're first put out have a dose.
Yeah.
And then as it's used over the years, that dose comes down and down and down.
Right.
But we started at the other end, at how low can you go before it's effective? And the way we look at it is the goal is to take it as little as possible, a small amount as possible, not every day, so that your body does most of the work, most of the recuperation, most of the healing, most of the cellular improvement, most of the mitochondria being more effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really interesting, and you go back to James talking about, you know what I mean, this isn't an everyday thing. This isn't, and one of the most used protocol is obviously the Fadiman protocol, which calls for 1 day on, 2 days off, right? It's sort of the sense of that dosage day, that transition day, and that integration day. How in other words, how did that protocol come to be? I know that there was a lot of citizen science done, but what really had you say, okay, wait, this is gonna really work?
Well, when you actually go behind the scenes, not what's written, but what actually happened, it's all usually mistakes, and you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, or
in the pharma industry too.
So I basically was told that microdosing had existed, and it was helpful, and that Albert Hoffman, who invented LSD, used it himself for thinking, for walking in the woods and thinking. And I thought to myself, remember, 50 years of high dose work, transcendence, giant anacondas eating you, all that great stuff. I thought, well, who cares? And then, however, I was in Santa Cruz, and there are a lot of people in Santa Cruz where if you say, will you try this? They say, sure, what is it? So a number of people tried a microdose, and they said, I really felt great. And then they said, the next day, I still felt great. So that was our first discovery, that unlike pharmaceuticals, which are symptom suppressors, microdosing seemed to activate the system, and after it had left the body, the effects were still there.
Mm-hmm.
That led to saying, don't take it every day. And then the third day was more of a research, originally kind of a research way of looking, and people liked it. So it is now the most popular protocol, but what it does, it reinforces that it's you aided by a microdose. Mm-hmm. It's not a microdose making you have a lot of different feelings or so forth.
And now we also have some nifty research that shows on the second day, people are having substantially more sleep.
And that was a double-blind study done in New Zealand. And what could be more sciencey?
Right. And I mean, that's obviously what tickles my fancy when you say things like double-blind and all that good stuff, just because of the world that I came from. But, I'm almost exclusively dealing in performance now with a lot of my clients, and that's what I try to espouse whenever the subject of microdosing comes up. And it's not just really the just the performance elements of it, but it's a lot of these ancillary benefits that you see, like sleep, but also as fathers, what I typically would notice and what I would tell folks is that this really helps you to kind of get outside of your head and be a little bit more present as a father when you're able to, kind of turn off work for a bit and stay at home, and you're not necessarily thinking about, everything that it is that you need to do the next day or what happened at work, but it really helps you to kind of sit there and be present with your kids and have, a good download of what they did that day and really help them to understand that you're there and you're not thinking about what it is that you need to do or get that next text out or another email. Helps you just kind of sit there and be with yourself for a bit as well as your family.
What we've seen is, in a sense, you're saying it's increased ability to focus where you want to focus.
Right. Yeah.
Nothing is sadder for a parent than to come home and your kids run to hug you and you're thinking about whether the last paragraph of what you wrote at the office really worked and should you have to work on it tonight, and you lose being there. That's basically not good health. That's not what we're looking at. And what we're seeing with microdosing is people function more effectively at work. They are more affectionate at home. We have lots of stories about improved sex. So we're looking at the various ways in which people want to spend their time, and it all improves if the whole system improves.
So another way to think about this is that we have three main categories of benefits. The first is physical and mental health benefits. The second is performance. And the third is increased communication, both within yourself and within your own symphony of selves. Shameless plug for the last book Jim and I wrote, and also with cells of the other people in your life. So you really are more present. And the speed of microdosing, someone gave an analogy on Clubhouse the other day where in a month, suppose you take a full 100 microgram hit, or you take 10 microgram hits over a month, and you get the same amount of new, interesting information. You get a gigabyte of information either way, but in one case, it's 100 megabytes at a time, and the other, it's all at once. When it's all at once, you're only going to remember half of it anyway. Yeah. You're going to get focused, and you're not going to have your normal day, and you're not going to be able to practice what you're learning and feel into what you're learning. So by slowing it down, especially with the Fadiman protocol, and making it nice and slow and conservative, we really get a lot more benefits. And that's brought us to one of our new phrases, which is less is enough.
Less is enough. I love that.
Everybody wants more and more and more, like Avi Esther likes to say, but no, less is actually enough.
If you, what's nice is a lot of people are now using it to improve their grades and to get off Adderall. This is something within the college world.
Yeah.
And what we get letters that say, I can now listen even to bad professors. And when I look at a PowerPoint, I only have to look once. I don't have to keep looking back and forth and trying to take notes and trying to listen.
Because you've slowed down and you're able to...
Oh, you're able to focus better. You're able to recall better. Your system works better. We have and they get better grades, which is a nice objective. We have students that say, I was a B student, I'm now an A student. In martial arts, since you work more in the physical world with endurance, one of our friends said, I used to get silvers. I now get golds. See, it's easy to understand that that's not a symptom substitution.
Right.
And it is that the whole system, and why do you get golds? Well, because I'm at a quarter of a second faster. I can see a quarter of a second sooner what my opponent moves, and I have a better grasp immediately of his or her strategy.
What we also have found is that, if you're taking, we'll just talk about LSD for now, it gets easier to talk about, like I know that if I'm at the microdose level, then I can be a lot more focused. And if I've taken too much, if I've taken 12 or 15 micrograms, I'm not as focused. I can't practice as much. Maybe I think I can have that super great workout one day, but within 2 days, then I'm tired and I'm out of sync. So keeping it to this really low level, where you're sort of aware of maybe that something is going on, but not very much, and it's not the focus of what you're doing, that enables you to have your ordinary day and to practice what you need to practice and to be with people without it getting in the way. And instead, you've got all that time to learn and practice and feel into it.
It's good that you brought the last part up too, just because I remember hearing this from Mike Tyson as he was kind of going through his training regimen, was that because he has a very addictive personality. So I think he started a little bit on the higher end, and luckily he was getting coached to back that off and then titrate up from a very, very low level. And then he clearly found that, that the microdose where he was at was making him much more aware, because boxing it's such a kinesthetic activity that you need to anticipate a lot of what was going on. And he was mentioning that his sparring partners were not on it, and he was able, and these were guys that were half of his age too. So he was able to really excel to the extent that he was feeling like he was one step ahead of his opponent.
Well, let's also keep in mind that it's a miracle that he was in that fight.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Still 60.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this is not something where, you throw away your crutches and dance.
Right.
This is improving the system to the level that's possible.
It's not like to me more is the substance, right? It makes you
exactly
40 years younger.
There's something about being a father, right? That you constantly have to be present, right? You have to be present because you have to provide. You have to be present because you're working. You have to be present because your kids need that, right? And there's something about microdosing itself that there's this real sense of now, and Jordan talked about it a little bit. That the present moment is really the only moment that we have. And as a father, I mean, that is so paramount, right? Because our kids need us, because our spouses need us, because our house needs us. What is it theoretically that microdosing does that puts us in such a present state of mind? I mean, I know myself that since microdosing, so I started microdosing 2.5 years ago, there's nothing else that exists except this present moment. Like the past, yesterday, that's just a memory. Tomorrow, that's just a fantasy. But it's sort of this real sense of the present moment that helps me to see things a little bit clearer. I wanted to see, James, if you can talk a little bit about that, about what it is about microdosing that helps us to get in that state.
Well, I have a certain amount of neurochemical jargon that I will not use.
Thank you.
Because we
appreciate it.
we really have a different model, which is we really just look at what the effects are on real people in real situations. And undoubtedly, there's all kinds of incredible research that people would love to do. But if it doesn't make those same people even better, we're not as interested as something. We're not theoreticians. We're not scientists. We don't give drugs to rats, and then you can imagine how they measure the chemicals in the rat's brain, and I don't want to discuss it. But we do look at when fathers say, I've learned better how to listen. And I actually find with microdosing, I look forward, not to telling my kids how to improve their lives, because I obviously know everything and they don't, but I get to listen to them and I get to be part of their world by not interfering. And that's a shift for me. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at. Is now you say, well, is there a neurochemical reason for that shift? And the answer is, yeah. But there's a neurochemical reason why you prefer butter brickle to fish food ice cream. Yeah. But nobody cares.
So having said that, I will throw out a little bit of neurochemical jargon, which is we know that the default mode network is toned down by psychedelics. And we know microdoses are not just a placebo, and that has a similar effect. Another way of looking at that is that there's more entropy in the system. But in either case, the normal part of you that is fixated in its normal way and not in the present moment, you kind of get snapped out a little bit of that. And if you're awake and open to it, you're going to see what's actually and experience what's actually happening in your world. So, your default mode network, that self, that the one you're ruminating when you're not thinking and you're always kind of in it, it's kind of focused. It's not really paying a lot of attention to what's actually going on in real time. And so maybe it helps kind of snap us out of that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's good. And so just to kind of start to talk about the actual practical application of microdosing, when a lot of my clients are starting to ask about it, there's an educational campaign that you start to need to really have a better understanding around. I think a lot of the initial questions are, why LSD, why MDMA, why psilocybin, and then obviously there's the dosing protocols. Can you maybe give us just a quick rundown on maybe how you would enter into a protocol with someone who's curious about it?
Yeah. Oh my!
I know it's kind of open-ended question. But
before that, all those earlier questions that your people are asking is why we need to write a book. Okay, which is different. There are differences between substances. There are dose ranges. There are some substances which people talk about as if they are microdosing and they're not. There's a lot of nonsense. There are things out there which are actually bad for you. All of that, that's kind of the normal range, and we can't cover it. Now, the question, give me the question I can answer again at the end, please.
Yeah.
Just ask.
Yeah, but I think it's that's why the book is so important. That's why, because look, the talk is out there, right? People are talking about microdosing. People are, but then there's a lack of education, right? And I think the last thing any of us want who are believers in what microdosing can do and the potential that it has is someone to say, oh yeah, I've heard about that microdosing thing. I'm going to go to that 7-Eleven because I saw some chocolate bar with some crazy looking mushrooms. Yeah. I'm sure if I use those will be great for microdosing. And that's why the book is so important.
I was part of a group that was dealing in mechanical engineering some years ago. And a lot of them were being asked to be expert witnesses at trials about people who were suing some company because their toaster hurt them or their dryer hurt them. And what my professor friend said, you know, what we've learned is nothing is idiot proof.
Mm-hmm.
Idiots have a way, a capacity, a brilliance in being able to harm themselves by misusing everything.
Yeah.
Okay? So
Yeah.
what we're looking at is how can you minimize the chances of that?
Yeah.
And that's by having the correct dose and a little correct knowledge and somebody who knows a lot more than you do. One person is called the authors of books. The other is called a coach. And between those two, people don't harm themselves. The wonderful thing about microdosing is the risk-reward ratio is very good.
Yeah.
Very low risk, very high rewards.
Yeah.
There are other substances where the risk is much higher, and maybe even the rewards are higher, but the risk is higher, and that, from our point of view, is not where we're going.
Yeah. And I think you have to stay away from the bro science, you know, is kind of like where we're going with a lot of this. I know a guy who did it at this level and did that. You know, there's a lot of that's going on right now just because of, you know, just the status and the sort of the where we are with microdosing in general. And then understanding that you do need to get a little bit more counsel around it, I think is the most important step to begin with. And then to go down the path that you were talking about, Dr. Fadiman, with, you know, getting access to a book, getting access to someone like Caesar. I think that's the best first step versus trying it yourself. And then what worked well with me was then starting to kind of collect your own data as you start down the path of microdosing and noticing.
What we're saying now is that the analogy is it's like learning to microdose is like learning to drive a car or ride a bike. So if you read everything in the book, you can actually figure out how to do that. If you have a friend or a teacher who's going to show it to you, then that will work too. And then after you've learned how to do it, you know, most people eventually aren't strictly doing any of the protocols, or they end up following more of an intuitive protocol, or they decide to mix a little bit of this with a little bit of that. But you do want to start, and you do want to, you know, if you're starting from scratch, you want to start low and go slow, and, you know, because again, less is enough, you know, and very often people are going below the recommended ranges. You'll see some stories on Reddit where people are 1 or 2 orders of magnitude less than it's recommended, and they're still having fabulous effects.
Because they're sensitive.
Yeah.
The idea that one dose is for all human beings is clearly nonsense.
No.
The notion that each person needs to calibrate for themselves, think about how you serve yourself dinner. You calibrate every night, each part of the plate. And you have a lot of experience, so you don't make many mistakes. That's the way human beings work. And microdosing is no different, where people find out how it works best for them, how often it works best for them. And often, where if they're taking it for a specific condition, say depression, after a few weeks of not being depressed, they stop. And if they don't become re-depressed, they don't use it again, at least for that. It's a very different model. Again, most of the pharmaceutical models, you have to remember, if it's a symptom suppression, it suppresses the symptom as long as the drug is in the body. As the drug leaves the body, the symptom says, whoa, everything's fine again, I can come back.
Come back.
As you know, a lot of medications, people are told, don't worry, this will really help you, and they only have to take it for your lifetime. That's that's a very clumsy way of working. Better, you know, what you learn when you garden is if you garden well, you favor the plants you want over the weeds, and you don't have to basically, so to speak, get caught in the weeds.
And the other thing that's so great about microdosing is that people are microdosing for one thing, and then they'll find that they're now eating better, or they're not smoking as much tobacco or cannabis, or that, you know, they didn't realize that they're working out better, even though they were like doing it for depression. So because, again, it's not a symptom suppressant, but it's a whole system healing, it kind of rises the tide of all of the systems in the body.
You become more aware of what you're doing to yourself while you're on a microdosing protocol.
Exactly, but your body is more aware, and it has more votes than usual.
Yeah,
as you know,
that's a good way to put it.
When you are reaching for the second piece of cheesecake, part of your body says, I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Yeah.
You say, but I want to do it. And you said, and your body says, I will talk to you later.
Yeah, right.
It's
And you start to
you said
remember
that.
how it affects you, and you start to see 2 and 3 steps down the road. Well, this is going to give me some inflammation. This is going to, help me.
Well, I want to make it a different way, because here's where we've got one of our first surprises, which is people were taking it, people in school were taking it for academics, and it was doing fine. And we would say, take, over a month, kind of note every day a couple of little moods, like a minute worth of testing. At the end of the month, look back. What did we miss? What would you like to tell us? And what we got is, gee, my grades are doing better, but I also noticed that I'm sleeping better, and my diet's improving. I didn't intend that. I'm losing weight. That was not my intention. And I notice I'm having less coffee and less weed and less alcohol. Why? Well, because we use all of those when we want to change the state of mind we're in. If the state of mind we're in is what we desire, we obviously don't want to put a consciousness disruptor, positive or negative, into that space. And people were saying, I'm going to the gym more often again. I'm going back to meditation. And they would, after they wrote their report, they would say, as we were, I'm really surprised when I look back and see that I wasn't paying attention to any of those changes. They were not on my goals list, so to speak. But my system seems to demand a higher level of health.
Yeah, and the aggregation that you're taking because it was advised to me to track a lot of these data, and that actually started its own positive momentum in so far as me journaling. So I was starting to mark down how I felt at certain times during the day, and then I found myself improving, which then kind of led to some gratitude journaling, and then everything else had kind of, like you were saying, like you have a better understanding of what your body's kind of telling you, and because you're not necessarily looking to suppress symptoms as much, your body's telling you to kind of head down a different direction, which is a much healthier direction, and for all the reasons that you had stated before.
So there was something Gary talked about there that I found was incredibly helpful for me, when I started microdose, and even now. It's that journaling, right? That journaling in the sense of, I sit down and I have intentions every day. It's almost like what I want the microdosing. It's almost like a roadmap for the microdosing of what I'm looking for, what I want to do. And at the end of the day, I write down what the high and the low was. And there was someone who I worked with, and I'm sure this is a question that a lot of people who start microdosing get, which is like, what should I be feeling? Like, what should I be feeling something? Like, what, where is it? And we were like 2-3 weeks into working with this person. And I said, well, why don't you go back to your journal and look at, your high and your low for different days, and where there was a high that, really stood apart. And they were telling me how there was this coworker that they couldn't even stand. They couldn't even stand the way they breathed. And yet this one day, they were able to sort of step back. They had microdosed that day. They stepped back and they were like, wait a minute, let me just listen, which is something that James talked about, that listening. And then she was able to sort of say, okay, wait a minute, I get it, I understand. And they found some common ground, but it was the journaling, right, that led her to say, okay, wait a minute, that's where I changed. And it wasn't about what I was feeling, it was about what I did. So I wanted to see if both of you could talk to about the importance of that journaling, that importance of that in that citizen science, right? The best scientists are the ones that keep the best notes. So if we're keeping notes of like when we're dosing, how much we're dosing, what we're dosing, and how we're feeling through the days, I mean, that could be an incredible, really wonderful tool to complement the microdosing, no?
Let me be a little bit of a skeptic here and say that I think there's two kinds of people. There are the kinds of people who want to work with a coach, who want to set intention, who want to do integration. They've been doing self-help and improvement things for their whole lives. They're very much going to want to work with somebody. But there's a lot of other people who actually don't like any of that. And the great thing about microdosing is it's still going to work. It's still going to work because it's still going to have more neuroplasticity and more anti-inflammatory effect and return people to homeostasis. So I think that for some people it can be incredibly valuable, but for other people it'll be a little bit like, if you watch a pot, it's not going to boil. Too much monkeying around in what they're doing is already kind of taking them away from what their ordinary day-to-day life is. And that's really where they want the improvement.
Yeah, I'm really love journaling, and I have journals going back literally decades that I don't think anyone will ever read, including me, but they fulfill a certain need of refocusing my day, and they have their uses, and microdosing simply, like other activities, makes it easier. And I have told a great many journalists who interview me about something that one of the interesting uses of microdosing is improved first drafts, which means I get their attention. And I have a number of letters after saying, "You're really right." And some of them have even written their article about their taking their own microdose and how it affected their writing. So what we're seeing is they were interested, obviously journalists are interested in writing well, and a first draft, no matter how good a writer you are, looks exactly like every other first draft in the universe, which is a blank page. Getting that
Exactly.
first go, it's a little bit like improving your diet. And again, one of my early stories is a wonderful junk food addict who was microdosing to get off of compulsive gambling. At one point, he goes out with his kids. He writes me and he says, "I looked at the menu and by God, I wanted a salad." Okay, this was like revelation. That's what we're seeing is, again, if you're, if we've all recovered from something like a cold or something more serious, and we know one of the greatest feelings in our life is feeling better. Microdosing apparently, and again, people report all the time, that they feel better. Their mood is elevated when we see it in published articles.
Or the phrase you hear a lot is "I'm back," or "I'm in that part of me that has fun doing things," or "Yeah, I still have pain, but I'm not the pain. I'm still me and I have some pain," as opposed to the pain predominating everything in their consciousness.
Right. Yeah. Getting back to where you once were, and it kind of goes back to setting your expectations. It's not going to help you to fly if you didn't fly before. So, but it gets you back to a point where you once were, where you were healthier, you were more present. You were in a place where you want to get back to, and I like that you had brought that up too. So, getting back to that place of peace and a sense of presence about you as well.
Or giving yourself more access to the different parts of who you are, where you can really feel into them and see what's what and lead with the one that's most appropriate in real time.
Yeah. And one thing I kind of wanted to maybe shift a little bit gears towards is you guys have been in this space for a while, especially you, James, and there's this whole idea of the stigma around it, and then really having a kind of a place of advocacy, and there's obviously legislation that's been ongoing around this space. Maybe you can kind of talk about how you've talked about that, maybe with your family, with your kids, or in your loved ones, or your family members, not just your family members, but the community around you as well, about the utility of it, about your work in it, and then how that helps other people maybe to talk to other folks about this as well. That's it's not as intimidating, or just kind of brushing off that stigma.
What we found is, rather than tell people how good it is, we say, here is what other people like you have written about what you're interested in. Mm-hmm. See, that gives you a distance, and you're not pitching. Mm-hmm. I went to this great restaurant, and I would love it if you would go to that restaurant. Okay? We all have said that, right? We want our friends to get the same pleasure we have. We don't say to them, this restaurant's really good for you, okay? We simply share what we have experienced ourselves, and we let people make their own decisions.
So you could think of the book as kind of a banquet of sumptuous delights, and you can decide if you want to, get some of that banquet for yourself.
So, for instance, someone writes me and they say, I have Lyme disease. Now, Lyme disease is caused by a bacteria or a number of bacteria, and its problem for Western medicine is it can harm or hurt or make you uncomfortable in any part of the body in any way. Okay? That means there's no medications.
Yeah.
But the body, and again, we have both researched, published in medical journals reports and some long detailed reports, and some people I've followed for years, how microdosing shifts their body, their ability to deal with the symptoms. It doesn't end the fact that Lyme is in their system or that their system has been neurologically injured, but it gives them, one woman moved from, I was in bed most of the time because everything else hurt. And about a year later, she was writing a former employer because she wanted to go back to work. And the employer wrote and said, I don't want to write you a recommendation. I just want to rehire you. So she has back in the world. She still has the condition. And she recently wrote me and she said, I wanted to find out if I would have any symptoms if I stopped microdosing. And she said the longest I went was 12 days. Okay. Which meant in this case, she needed to continue microdosing. I mentioned other groups like people who are depressed who stop. They don't need it, so to speak. So we're really still learning. And the reason that I don't propose it, except that you should get your own information, is that's the way that science actually works. It doesn't work by laboratories and statistics. That's second round. Why would anyone do any study? Because somebody had an experience or at least a thought that it might be, worth studying. But half of the research that's been published on microdosing has been in the last year and a half while we were writing the book. We started writing the book quoting a lot of other people saying, well, there isn't much research. At the end of the book, we didn't say that. We said there's a growing body of research and it's growing every week or every few days. And I just got a great little research project from Lithuania and another from Poland. So hard research, these were people in their scientific institutions. So what we're seeing is we're filling in with scientific studies what we have found in real life events. Pharmacology has to work the other way. You start with nothing, and you then find what's called phase 1. Does it kill you?
Right. I know it all too well.
Yeah.
Exactly. If it kills you, let's back it off
exactly.
a little.
Yeah. Exactly. If it kills you, let's just sort of
are trying to sell it for. And phase 3 is we give it to a lot of other groups who don't have any economic interest in it selling, because if it really works with people who aren't financially going to benefit, that's a much more realistic sample. And then the fourth level is real life experience. When you go to the doctor and you have, and he says, try this. This is a new thing. It came, I think it might help you.
Yeah.
That's what we call real life experience. And that's the only real way that you can determine if something is beneficial. So
and the pharmaceutical industry is now,
because that's the way it happened.
Yeah. And the pharmaceutical industry is now starting to recognize that with their real world evidence initiative. And they're trying to figure out how this really incorporates into a lot of their everyday lifestyle, their patients, because when they're doing these studies that are FDA clinical trials, it's a very tightly controlled study where it's not real world everyday experiences. So once they get into the real world, it's kind of a different ball of wax, so to speak.
A nice bridge is starting to happen where in Canada there's an at-home for depression study with LSD that's in their equivalent of, I think, phase 3. So they're kind of recognizing that you have to kind of experiment with it in the context that it's actually happening in people's lives. Right. And so will that be a double-blind, placebo-controlled randomized study? No. Does that have to be the final arbiter for all science? No. We know that it wasn't before thalidomide happened, and they made that the one standard. And as we write about in the book, if you go back to the history of Western science, starting with the Royal Academy, people have been talking to each other to figure out what different substances do, and then they kind of reach a conclusion. We've been doing that for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was something that James talked about that I think is really important, which is, again, have conversations, don't make recommendations. And I say that a lot. because everyone's experience is so different, right? Everyone's experience with microdosing is so different. Everyone's microdosing a different substance. Everyone's on a different protocol. So at least for me, it's more about having these discussions, openly having these discussions. Look, you're both wearing one of my shirts, microdosing. Why? Because that starts that conversation. We need to have these conversations so more people maybe can sort of find a different way. But that being said, do either one of you ever see a situation where someone can literally go to the doctor and the doctor's going to go, you know what, I think that if we put you on a microdosing protocol, you're going to find a lot of benefits? I mean, can we see that potentially happening?
No, we can see it happening because we get the reports from both sides.
Yeah.
Psychotherapists in general, and we have a lot of psychotherapists, and we have now a number of letters. When my clients are microdosing, they do better in therapy. Now that sounds the same as the coach saying you run faster. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
They don't say that you don't need psychotherapy because that's what they know how to do. They just say it allows people to move faster, to go through traumatic experience, stuff easier. And if a patient asks me, I will say exactly what I just said. We also have a couple of therapists who acknowledge, even one in print, I think the LA Times, that he recommends microdosing for his patients for those same reasons. So the fact is that physicians have a fundamental desire to make people better. They have an ethical obligation to use the best possible materials or systems or ways of working. The fact is that microdosing being illegal is a problem, but one of the things that's happening is psilocybin mushrooms, and there's 200 species. Nature, for some reason, likes psilocybin. They grow on every continent but Antarctica. They can be grown in a drawer at home. There are companies now selling what are called grow kits. We're seeing people beginning to take control of their own health and letting their beautiful, look at that, and letting their physicians and psychotherapists and so forth know what they're doing. And some psychotherapists will say, I support you. Some psychotherapists will say drugs are evil. Some psychotherapists will say, where are you getting it?
There's like that on the record, off the record discussion.
Of course, and
on
that's
the record,
correct from an ethical
record,
standpoint, which is you don't want someone to suffer if you know there's a better way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's gonna take time. I mean, we can name some of the areas where off the cuff you could say, yeah, microdosing could replace a lot of the medications that are giving, including for children. We could talk about ADHD, we can talk about depression, we can talk about migraines, all things we have good evidence for. But even within the psychedelic leadership, people are still saying things like, well, the only way to handle treatment-resistant depression is to take high doses and work with a therapist. So the idea that some of these things might apply to, children who are 3 years old who are on Adderall, and that's the age you're allowed to start, and there's tens of thousands of them. So, in the big picture, you can see how we'd all be a lot better off if this was accepted, but it's, mainly cutting edge people and really open people and the kind of people we know. It's going to take a while till it kind of gets into the general parlance.
One of the things, however, is this is now federal government figures, and I only have to assume they're on the low end because you have to fill in a form that says I'm doing the following illegal things.
It's the illegal thing.
Over 40 million people have taken LSD, not LSD and psilocybin, just LSD, since it became illegal. And if we look at kind of the educational level of those people, most of them are in the top half. So it is very rare these days when I talk to a group of physicists or physicians that most of them have had some psychedelic experience, often in college. And so they're not buying that it's illegal because it's a terrible thing. They're simply aware that it's illegal, and that's a problem. If my kid could benefit, am I going to bend the law a little bit? You bet.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll tell you, I got a letter yesterday, okay? She said, I listened to a podcast that we did, and I'm ordering your book. And my grandson, who's 8 years old, is ADHD. and he's on Ritalin. Now, I know when she reads the book and she gets to the very large ADHD section, and we say, whatever else we know about microdosing, the side effects are less than Ritalin. And we also know that this child will be told Ritalin, and the grandmother says he's okay with it. He's not upset with his Ritalin. But we know that he will be told that he will take Ritalin until he dies. And that's probably not a good idea, regardless of what the pharmaceutical is. So we're seeing it happen within the culture. The legalization will be a whole lot of other problems. The commercialization of who can make money and who can stop other people from using it, all that stuff will happen. But mushrooms don't know they're illegal, and they keep growing.
And the stigma is pretty prevalent, starting with the war on drugs and all the misinformation about psychedelics and just the anti-pleasure nature of the spirit of capitalism and the Protestant work ethic. We're not supposed to enjoy things. So there's a lot of reasons that people have stuff on psychedelics that they shouldn't have. And it's going to take a while for that to kind of peter out as well.
Unfortunately, if I look at different professional groups, and I talk to lots, the group that has the lowest number of people who have any psychedelic experience are politicians.
Yeah, and it's crazy that it's helping so many people. I met a surgeon not too long ago, and he said, "Look, I'm microdosing, and to me it sounds like I'm much more present during surgery. I'm seeing things that maybe before were sort of foggy a little bit, but I can't share this with anybody. Like I can't go and tell other surgeons that I'm microdosing because." I mean, look what the potential could happen. And yet, if I'm taking some pharmaceutical, I could literally be drinking alcohol right before surgery and no one would say anything. But yet, if I say, yeah, I'm taking a small little capsule of 150 milligrams of psilocybin every third day, I could lose my license.
No, see, what we're finding is, if in an idle conversation in the kind of green room of surgery before you go in, and there's the couple of assistant nurses and the specialist and the guy doing the machinery for anesthesia, and you say, does anybody know anything about microdosing? And you can immediately see that 3 people in the room do, because they went to college, they had a psychedelic experience, they're in the medical world, they read the literature, we've had various taboos in this country which have been totally ignored. What most people don't know is during Prohibition, which was just, as you know, a total failure, but it was a great success for people in the hard liquor industry, because people moved from beer and cider as a country to hard liquor, because if you're smuggling, you want the most concentrated you've got. Yep. And the number of places in which you could get alcohol in the United States went up by several 100%. During Prohibition.
Yeah.
So when people, and that was for pleasure, imagine what people are willing to do for the health of their children.
For healing.
And another nice example is that it is changing, is that we have a friend named Bruce Damer who is on the cover of Scientific American for his ideas about how life originated in warm pools, and there's teams all over the world following it, and he got his revelation on a high dose, and for years he didn't tell anybody. And in 2022, at a big scientific meeting with NASA types and real PhDs, he just told everybody, and nobody blinked an eye. It was like, oh, that's how you got the inspiration. That's cool.
For years, the Silicon Valley was fueled by psychedelics as well.
You do find some circles, right, where you can openly talk. Look, I openly talk about psychedelics every single day. But I'll
give you one you wouldn't necessarily think about. The governor of Texas. Okay, he presented at the last massive 10,000 person psychedelic conference.
Rick Perry, yeah.
Well, Abbott, yeah.
So right.
Well,
yeah. What we're seeing is everyone who says I've used psychedelics, nothing happens, except other people come up and say, "Hey, me too." Yeah. The fact that it is illegal is an error, It was never made illegal for any medical or psychotherapeutic reason. It was done politically by Nixon for other uses. So, we're living in a world where where the laws, some of them, don't make real sense, and that's not our problem. It's a real problem. And what we know is, as more and more attorneys are microdosing, and as more and more legislators, and there are now a few who stand up in Congress and say, my life was turned around, and then they mention what the psychedelic was, it'll happen. Our goal is simply to give people information now for their health and well-being now. And we trust people to do the right thing.
And obviously that goal is coming from the incredible book that both you, James, and Jordan wrote, Microdosing for Health, Healing, and Enhanced Performance. What a wonderful book, and what a wonderful time to have this, because the discussion is there. I'd like to get a sense from both of you, where's the future of microdosing? I mean, do we see somehow AI coming in and helping people personalize their microdosing, right? Maybe instead of 1 day on, 2 days off, maybe for someone there's a special type of protocol that happens, or maybe some other supplement that they can use along with their microdosing. I mean, do you guys see that happening, that maybe there's more tailored, more personalized microdosing?
No, I don't see it with AI. AI only can use information it has, and it never acknowledges when it doesn't really know what it's talking about.
Right.
So that's a problem.
Smart,
it doesn't. So if you say to AI, give me 5 reasons why it'd be a good idea to microdose, they'll be pretty good. If you say, give me 50 reasons, it says, fine, 50 reasons. And the last 10 are really really stretching it as far as it can be stretched. It's really like good for gardening, okay? So what we're seeing indeed is, and you guys are kind of the model, we're seeing human beings coaching human beings. Okay, I haven't seen anything yet that says the college athletic department has just fired its coaches and is using AI.
It's true.
It doesn't seem to it's not a good use of AI. Like anything else, something, even microdosing, isn't good for everything.
But without the AI, what we are finding is we have this new guy with pain. It's a different protocol. The shingles people use a different protocol. People who have Asperger's, high-functioning autism, turns out they need a higher dose. So I do expect that we are going to see individuals discovering and figuring out for themselves in a wide range of issues that, here's where we want to go away from the conservative starting protocol. Everybody should start with that, but eventually people are going to figure out other things.
It's good for the right utility, as long as maybe you're tracking it for yourself and you can say, look, I used this amount on this day, I ate this beforehand, I worked out at this point, and then you can track it going like that for everyone individually. And that's the whole idea of personalized medicine in general.
And it's just, and it's just, I also think the fact that so many people are using wearables, right, where you're tracking pretty much everything that you're doing, from your sleep to your eating to your heart rate, and if maybe some of those metrics, right, that somehow someone can say, well,
more information you have, the better decisions you can make. Yeah. The problem we're getting into is if you give the information to an indifferent source, you'll get indifferent results.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we all get excited. Remember when we all loved Teslas, okay? Now, nothing's happened mechanically to Teslas, but they've fallen out of popularity because they have suddenly an emotional association. Yep. And that has nothing to do with the mechanical system, but it has to do with the living system that surrounds it. So just as we are, if you actually look up the written descriptions of antidepressants, most of them now start with, although it is not effective for many people, and then it goes on to talk about whatever it talks about. That's a shift in the cultural awareness. And it is something that the pharmaceutical companies are acutely sensitive to, which is why they are what they are. See, at this point, it's so wonderful where we're saying, and the best possible microdoses are made by Dorothy, his wife, and so forth, and the three of us, and we make this product. And at the end of this program, we're going to give you a discount. That might be a very nice thing to have happen. However, it invalidates a level of honesty that we're able to maintain. Now, let me give you just a negative example. You can only make positive. We got a letter, and she says, I'm 82 years old. I have managed to get off my antidepressants. Now, it's already very impressive. I've been microdosing, and this dose level didn't work. So I upped my dose, and I got more depressed. What should I do? Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask AI. Okay. So we have a very, very high percentage of people who take for treatment-resistant depression, meaning their antidepressants don't work, and they have a very high success rate. We don't have 100%. So I'm writing her what we know and what variables she can look at, but it may be that this isn't going to work for her, and that's the way the human system actually is. So we're looking both and more interested actually in people for whom it isn't working, because those people rarely share. You know, when you go to a restaurant that's terrible, you don't talk about it. You don't recommend it to your friends.
Yeah, that's true.
So what we're looking at is, how does information spread, and how is information received, and how is it assimilated, and how is it used? And podcast, as you know, reaches people who then say, well, maybe if I'm serious about my health and there's one book that seems to be useful, maybe I'll look at the book, or I know someone I think who's a microdose coach. I'll see what they are thinking and where their information comes from. And so that's how it goes.
Yeah, and it's like we're all kind of lifting each other. Like the other day, we had a discussion about sleep, and with Carla and Wendy, that was the best discussion of the different substances and how it might affect sleep and what people need to think about. And it's like, I never heard all of that discussed in one place, and we should capture that and put that out. And that's what's happening. We're hearing bits and pieces about the practicalities and the pragmatics, and then we gather it and then we share it back out.
I love that. I love that concept of sharing it, right? And it's sort of, we talk a lot about legacy in the show. What legacy are we leaving, as a father, as a husband? What legacy do both of you hope that this book leaves? Because it's really important, because it's something that people are curious, right? And it's people's childhood curiosity has been poked at, and now here's this guiding light to, okay, let's do this the right way, because the book covers so much. What do you guys really want this book to leave?
Dalai Lama has a suggestion about what you want to do with your life. If you can, alleviate suffering. Now, he doesn't say you should be a Tibetan Buddhist. He just says, let's start with what everyone can agree to. It's a good thing to alleviate suffering. Information is one of the ways you alleviate suffering. This book is simply the result of thousands of people who wrote us and said, this is what happened to me, this is what I did. And they have gotten, because that's what we keep saying, the only reason you're sending in this report is so that other people can benefit from your experience. That's the legacy.
And for me, I have a slightly different focus, which is, for 50 years now, I've been working on human potential, from parapsychology to everything that you can think of. And I haven't found a better way to unleash and capture some of what we're capable of as humans than microdosing. So it's not just in the enhancement, it's in the, first you get people healthy, first you get people healing, and then you get them in health, and then they can focus on performance. And my belief is that unleashing human potential is really the only way we can save the bio platform and life on Earth at this point.
Yeah, and it makes a ton of sense from a performance standpoint, because there's so many underlying issues that will get you to performance, and you really want to heal first, and then give them a chance to really understand themselves as they're going through that healing process. And only then are they able to really start to hit that ramp where they can start to perform at that point, because there's so many things that are underlying. And I like the fact that you guys are kind of humble enough And you talked about this a little bit as you're writing the the manuscript for this, and you're continually aggregating data. You're still getting so much more data as that kind of comes to you as you're writing it. It's almost like you have to put your stake in the sand at some point and say, okay, this is when we publish. And I'm guessing there's going to be more additions to this book as we start to pull in additional data.
Hope so. Yep. I mean, there's some wonderful research that's coming out. I mean, I mentioned, I think it's the Polish study, and they basically said, what are the side effects of microdosing? And I thought, oh no, it's got to be one of those articles which you don't want to read. So it wasn't. It was straight science. They said, here's this criteria we had. Here's the databases we used. We got 31 studies. 14 were hard science, double blind, blah blah blah. 14 were clinical, and a couple were individual. Here's what we found. Here are the side effects of microdosing. Some anxiety, some headaches, and then they said, but they're all short-lived and transient. So what they said, yeah, that's what the scientific literature says, and that's where we are. Now, a year from now, we hope that there will be, and there will be, because it's easy to do, another paper which will say now there's 50 studies, and here are the side effects. And we have this one case in Estonia where someone had a headache for over a week. And that will be an additional piece of information. Again, nothing is good for everybody. The reason you start with microdosing, among other systems, as low as possible is because should you be one of the hypersensitive people, you don't want to have a difficult experience, and you want to be able to recalibrate until it either works for you or it doesn't. And for a lot of people, they say, well, I microdosed and we don't know anything else. And they say, but it didn't seem to matter, so I don't. We're not beating on their doors. We're not saying we have the truth and the light and the way. We don't. We have a lot of information, and again, it's not from the hippie underworld of San Francisco. Our reports come from 51 countries. There's a larger study which has reports from 80 countries. This is a worldwide phenomena, and the information apparently is about the same from country to country. We haven't found any, enormous differences culturally or on different continents. So it looks like it affects human beings kind of the same way.
I love that sort of the broad spectrum worldwide view of microdosing. Is the book coming out in other languages? I mean, is that a plan? I mean, it's just
we're working on that.
It's just important.
We're working on that. We talked to a fellow who's got a donor advised fund whose mission is to publish psychedelic literature in countries all around the world in different languages. So hopefully this will all happen.
That's awesome. How's the book going? I mean, it's being received. There's great reviews out there. It's selling. I hear people talking about it. How are you guys getting, good reception from the book?
According to our publisher, they're extremely happy. We consider, we have this realization that more people reading it means more people suffering less. So we have a slightly different point of view about how much is enough. So we would like it to be, more available to more people in more situations. And the way it works in the publishing world right now, it's a hardcover. And what happens when a book does well enough in hardcover, they put it out in softcover, which basically is the same book at a much lower price. So that's the pattern. And if your publisher says only nice things to you, and you've had a really good advance, which means they're on the hook, things are going very well.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
That's good.
And we're just also happy at the wide range of interviews we're getting. Danica Patrick and Mayim Bialik and Greenfield and just all these different people. And we'll see if any of the sort of the bigger podcast fish bite, the Tim Ferrisses and the Hubermans and the Joe Rogans. We'll see.
Yeah, and look, it's getting the information out there. Both of you are really incredibly proactive in promoting the book, which I think is wonderful. I know you guys have done a couple of book tours, or at least in some stores. Is there other places where people could come and see you and at least chat and get to see the magic of both of you together?
March 30th in Corte Madera Book Passage passages.
Okay.
We'll be there. That'll be our third bookstore, and we'll see where we go from there.
Well, we got to talk to the publisher. We need you guys to come out to Atlanta. We need you guys here. We need to have a nice little book signing here. I would be wonderful to have both of you come out.
Great to meet you, Cesar.
Yeah, we will. We'll do that for sure. We'll definitely
More likely to come here before we go there, but who knows?
I got to get out to the
in San Diego. Yeah.
I got to get out more to the West
Coast. A little more
Coast.
likely, but the fact is that one of us is considerably older than the other one, and the older one travels less, and that kind of slows things down. But since my last major book where I did a lot of traveling, which was another psychedelic book, the atmosphere and methods have changed. So this podcast is now the method that is generally preferred by both authors and publishers, because we can go to more places more easily, and that the audience is pre-selected.
Yeah.
To have an interest. So when we worked with Ben Greenfield, who is this incredibly prolific exercise, health, supplements, all of which he's tried more things and more techniques than any living being. And when we said to him, hey, would you like to have us? He said he'd be thrilled. And his particular point of view, we knew who his audience was. And when you basically go to a bookstore, one of the reasons that bookstores find it difficult and have many fewer have events is because there's a very large online presence for people. So, for instance, after this program, it's very easy to order this book. And that is shifting the nature of, quote, what used to be called author tours.
Right.
Yeah.
Another shift is the popularity of the audiobook, which right now is outselling the hardcover, and that's partly because we have a great narrator, Kaleo Griffith, but it's also because the question and answer format of the book makes it particularly well suited for an audio listening. You only have to, listen to and hold on to 1 to 5 minutes at a time, and that's all you're required, and then you can move on to the next section.
It's actually great because I do have it. I have it in the car as one of my audio books, and every once in often, you know what I mean? Let me just skip through somewhere. Let me just listen for a while, and it's a really, really, really great listen because there's just so many questions that are answered. There's so many things that are there from, and you talk
also,
to.
What we do when we do a podcast, we say to this audience, this selected group, this friends of yours and ours, if you've had a microdosing, if you've been microdosing and it has benefited you, and you feel that you would like to share your benefit, please write us at microdosingbook.com. That's one word. Just whatever you want to share. And just a couple of days ago, we got a sharing from a woman that said, for my PMS, every month I microdose during that week, and I'm no longer spiteful and angry.
All these wonderful things that are happening. I mean,
so that goes up on the website because there are a lot of women that have problems during their periods, and it's not necessary.
And it's having those testimonials, right? Those testimonials are people are so important.
We don't call them testimonials. We don't ever call them testimonials. We call them reports because
I love that.
They're just telling you what's going on. There's no push. And again, we get also reports when people have a difficult time, and that's probably where we are. Much more interesting at this point because we follow up and find out what if we can find out what the issue is.
And it's nice to think of real world evidence and not anecdotes, which is like, oh, you've only got anecdotes. And I can't tell you the number of medical doctors who immediately say, well, all you've got is anecdotal evidence. And you're like, well, let's read the book and we'll start there and we can talk about this rather than just kind of jumping on us with that.
Right. So
there you go. Share your reports. Share your reports of how microdosing has changed your life. I cannot thank both of you enough for taking the time to be on this podcast, for taking the time to share your wisdom about microdosing, to share what you guys are doing. I mean, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. James, you've been such an inspiration from day one. You were this guiding light to, what microdosing was. I mean, it literally, you educated me in such a point. Jordan, you've been an ally, a friend in all of this. Thank you very much. So thank you both. Thank you both for taking the time to being part of this podcast. Please let people know where they can get the book.
Well, they can get the book at any place they can get a book. That's the nice thing about the system. There are books. We recommend your independent bookstore.
Yeah, if you go to the website, there's a book locator that will give you a whole bunch of different places other than just Amazon where you can buy the book. And if you're in a different country, it'll take you to that too. So, yeah.
Now, I should mention that we're both wearing our work shirts.
I saw that. Thank you both very much. Exactly. I feel
our beloved
honored.
host is the creator and distributor of a lot of wonderful stuff. That's just really a fun and pleasurable level of what this is all about. Because again, we're not even selling information. We're allowing information to be distributed, and people make their own decisions. And the next level up is guys like you who do the fine tuning, who do the personal work.
Well, I'm
so
more than glad.
Let's not. We're not strangers. Okay? This is like a family event that we get to share with you.
Yeah,
I'm more than happy to take that baton from you and run and hand it to the next one and continue this relay of again. I think all of our Northern Star is to have a better humanity, have healed people, have people just be more authentic, be more creative, be more empathetic, just be the best version of themselves. Gary, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, well, keep doing what you're doing. I think the really important part of what you guys are doing is you're prompting the discussion around it, and that you're able to put it in the ether that makes it more accessible for people. And like you said, not everyone is going to go down the same journey for it. So at least be able to offer yourself to have the conversation around it and look for these types of reports. Like you said, I like how you're characterizing that as well. So, this is the information that's out there, can engage someone who's probably a little bit more learned about it if you're really interested. But providing a lot of the information is what you guys are doing. And that's what's needed right now. And I
also recommend to look at Reddit has a subreddit called Microdosing. As of today, it has about 290,000 people.
Yeah, incredible.
Share information. Some of it. The nice thing is when it's not accurate, another 10 people suddenly will write in.
Self-policing.
It's been a very useful site for us to understand, again, the worldwide information. This is not a kind of small event. This is affecting the culture already and what Paul Stamets says, people who use mushrooms are nicer. We think that's the ultimate kind of cultural goal.
Right.
Yeah, I've always said I've never met anybody microdosing who's an a-hole. That's for sure. So both of you, James and Jordan, thank you for cultivating so much wisdom. I mean, you guys were part of this mission. When I see people just sharing the wisdom that they have, that's what it's about. Keep cultivating that wisdom, keep spreading much love like the mushrooms tell us to do. Always remember today is the best day of your life. I mean, every day we're surrounded by wonderful people. Today we're surrounded by these two incredible gentlemen. So thank you again, both of you. Thank you for everybody listening in. Thank you to our partners, Wonderbag, AWS Scales, Frequency Capsules, and Entheo for making sure this show gets on the air. And to everybody out there, thank you so much. Have a great day. Don't forget, create that love you wealth, which is that wealth that just gives back and gives to your other people. So much love to everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary. Thank you both.
All right.